Toolkit. In that context, this is what we're going to be going through today. For those of you who were on the webinar a week ago, you will recall that we spent that webinar going through in quite a bit of detail how to advocate to a provincial representative, or more specifically, how to advocate in person. But in addition to advocating in person, these are some of the other advocacy tools that we're going to talk about in this webinar. This is by no means an exhaustive list, just to be clear. It's just a sample of some of the tools that I've used over the years that I think can be particularly effective in doing this kind of work. So let's start with a review and context. And let me take a moment to remind folks where your advocacy tools fit in the broader context of advocacy. Again, last week we went through in a little bit of detail the steps to creating an effective advocacy strategy, and they are, as always, your key message development, developing your 3 key messages, what it is that you want to say about the issue to a decision maker. Development of your tools, that's what we're talking about today, and they're simply the means of communicating your key messages, or primarily communicating your key messages. And then, of course, your one ask. The whole reason we do advocacy is to ask for the one thing you need from the decision maker and not a list of what you want. Well, there's no set order as to when to use the various advocacy tools at your disposal, including, for example, in-person meetings, as we discussed previously. Timing is important, and I will address that with each tool I review. But ultimately, what you want to do is to create what we call this layering effect over time. You want to create a series of advocacy tools, or you want to undertake and utilize a series of advocacy tools that layer on top of one another, creating a critical mass of noise, if you will, to decision makers. And that takes planning. That's my point. It takes planning to do this. You don't just randomly start doing various things and hope that this wall of noise creates the volume that you need. That's not effective. You need to systematically go through and layer these various tools on top of one another for the maximum result. So I'm going to start with what we call events. This is a very large topic with many facets to it, and so I'm going to give you really just an overview of what we mean by events. We're talking here primarily about events where you as an organization go to a provincial legislature, for example, or a federal legislature, national legislature, whatever it may be, and you have an event that engages various decision makers at that provincial or federal capital, whatever it is. So the first example is an advocacy day at the legislature, where you take an entire day, you plan a day with your stakeholders, and you undertake to have a series of events, a number of different events, and we'll talk about those in a moment, and also meetings with decision makers, with elected officials in particular, at which time you and your supporters go and meet with, for example, your own personal representatives, provincial representatives, for example, and that composes part of the advocacy day. You may sit in question period. You may actually go into the legislature during question period. You may be introduced by a member of provincial parliament during that session. And there's a portion of the day in which members of the public members who sit in the gallery can be recognized. And you may also have a reception, for example, and that's very typical as well. So the next sort of events that are listed there can either be single events that you do by themselves, or they can compose part of a larger advocacy day. So a caucus meeting is where you and your supporters go and speak to a particular caucus. So the Liberal caucus in Ontario, or the NDP caucus in British Columbia, or whatever it may be. But it's specifically meeting with members of just one party and presenting some information about yourself, your issues, again, back to your key messages and all of that kind of stuff. An MLA breakfast is where you invite elected representatives, could be MLAs, or depending on the province, they have different names, of course, but MPPs in Ontario. But you essentially you invite them to a breakfast, and again, it's usually sort of more of a reception type of atmosphere. But again, you have a chance to deliver your key messages and your one ask, and get their engagement through that. A roundtable discussion with bureaucrats, that's where you will sit down with bureaucrats and engage them very, very specifically around a particular issue. So there's no political people there, it's just bureaucrats. These can be very effective. They're usually quite small events, but depending on which bureaucrats you can get, again, it can be very effective at delivering your key messages. Something we call a lunch and learn with political staffers. I like this idea of a lunch and learn because a lot of political staffers in our system of government don't know a lot about particular issues. So they won't necessarily know a lot about your organization, about a particular disease area, for example. So this is a combination of sitting down with political staffers who are key to the process and educating them about your issue. And of course, you're educating them in a way that you want them to respond to your issues. So this can be a really effective way to get people on board, again, to deliver your key message, ultimately deliver your key messages in your one ask. And then I spoke about a reception in a moment. That's pretty straightforward. These receptions can take various combinations of, you can have politicians, political staffers, bureaucrats, only politicians and political staffers, and not have bureaucrats. It just depends on the circumstances. So all that to say, the forms these events can take is almost limitless. But my advice is to choose an event that is consistent with both your resources and capacity to engage at a given time. In other words, don't bite off more than you can chew. Organizing an entire advocacy day takes time. It's not uncommon for organizations to plan these things a year in advance and spend that year getting organized. So this is not something you throw together in a week. These are really quite detail-oriented events in terms of being able to get them organized, and a lot hinges on a number of different factors. So with that, especially when you need to do a lot of awareness building around your issue or your organization, I recommend doing one of these events early on in a campaign, if you're, for example, launching a campaign around a particular issue, and regularly. Try to do these things annually if at all possible. You don't have to do the same thing every year, but try to go to a provincial capital or try to go to Ottawa or wherever on a regular basis, on an annual basis, in order to be able to build over time knowledge and awareness about your issues and your organization. So just moving on from there, objectives. I'm a very strong proponent that before you run out and say, you know, we need to do an event or something like that, that you figure out why do you need to do this event. Are you raising awareness and educating decision makers about your issue? Are you putting a face on your organization? And by the way, it could be many of these things. It doesn't just have to be one of these things. Are you starting to build relationships? Do you want to give your supporters an experience or get them practicing doing advocacy and engaging with decision makers? And are you requesting, excuse me, are you requesting an actual change? Or are you requesting the decision makers you're meeting with to take some actual action and that kind of thing? Again, it's important that you just sit down and figure out, and again, this is not a finite list. This is just 5 examples of the kinds of objectives that I think organizations will typically have. But which of these things is it? And then you tailor your event to meet your objectives. So if you are not requesting a change, if there is no action, then that's fine. You perhaps are just in the kind of raising awareness and building relationships mode. That's great. Then tailor your event to meet those objectives and don't worry about anything else. And finally on the slide, there may or may not be an ask associated with such events. Not all events necessarily have an ask. You don't necessarily ask the attendees to do something as a result of their attendance. You should, depending on the circumstances, and if you've got an issue that falls within their jurisdiction and you want them to take action around. But having these events, especially initially in the early years, just to raise awareness, just to put a face on your organization, build relationships, and give people some experience interacting with politicians in particular, that's a perfectly sensible reason to do these things without necessarily having an ask. Selecting a date. You may wonder why I've started with the date, but much of your event success will hinge on choosing the right date and, quite frankly, just sheer luck in the context of the date that you have chosen. So governments may actually act on issues that are brought to their attention shortly before or after an election. So just be cognizant of where you are in what we call the election cycle kind of thing. Avoid holiday seasons. Avoid dates on which events are happening in the legislative buildings that might provide competition to you. Have the date coincide with other related issues. So, for example, World Cancer Day. So if you're representing a particular organization and there's some kind of a day going on, a week, a month that's devoted to your issues, you may want to look at having your event correspond with that. And also, elected representatives are also more likely to be available at the start of the week. Always keep in mind that, for example, the provincial legislature here in Ontario only sits Monday to Thursday. The MPPs are not around on Friday, so of course you'd never have an event on Friday, or even for that matter on Thursday, because half of them are out the door late Thursday afternoon and aren't going to stick around for a reception kind of thing. So selecting a date is critically important. I have seen really, really well-planned entire days go awry because people have chosen the wrong date. And again, I'm distinguishing that from you choose a date that appears to be good, and then at the last minute something goes wrong. You can't do anything about that. There's nothing you can do about certain events. But always make sure that you do as much as you can to choose the right date. So just continuing on with that, most importantly, you want to choose the best legislative date in terms of what's going to work for the people that you're targeting, not necessarily the date that's most convenient for you, for example, as an individual. Again, it's most likely when the legislature is sitting, and don't forget, as I said a moment ago, there are things called constituency days and weeks when MPPs and MLAs are not around, and it's also a good idea to avoid a time when critical matters are being debated. So just some more sort of hints as to how you do this. Now, after you've selected your date, the next thing you need to do is to engage your supporters, because there's no point having an event in which you don't have people come out, so I'm using the term your supporters, come out in order to engage these elected politicians or bureaucrats. So engaging your supporters, they can help determine what the issues are that you'll present to government representatives, for example. You may want to do a survey to figure out what that is. They can sometimes provide contacts in government, or may even have relationships with people already in government. And so they can help to make those connections and ensure that you can get in to see certain people. And they can attend to tell a first-hand story, as it says there, of how the issue affects their daily lives and give personal support to the importance of the issue being addressed. So date first, but then the next thing you need to do is to make sure that your supporters are absolutely engaged, and it's a date that works for them to come out en masse, depending on how large a constituency you have and how many people you're trying to engage in order to deliver your messages. And again, if you have an ask. Inviting government officials, again, this may seem like a lot of detail, but I give this to you for your reference because these are the kinds of things that I've seen when they're not done right, they can throw off the entire event. They can really make or break an event, despite the fact that it may seem very, very down into the weeds. So when you invite government officials, provide an introduction to your organization, why you're requesting a meeting, if in fact meeting with government officials is part of your event. It may be that you're just doing a reception, but assume that there's face-to-face meetings. Request a meeting on the event on the day of the event that you're going to be at the provincial capital. Provide any personal information that you may have gathered from survey of supporters, contact name and number of the person writing the letter, and provide a date by which you'll contact their office to confirm their attendance either at an event or at a meeting or whatever it may be. This kind of detail helps a lot in terms of securing getting them to an event or in a particular meeting. Logistics and flow, I'm not going to read all of these to you, but again, logistics matter a lot in all of this. and I trust that many of you appreciate the kinds of things that supporters want to know. Where do I park when I get to the event? Who's going to meet me when I get to the event? Will I have materials to go into these meetings so that I'm prepared for such a thing? So having your logistics down, having your flow down, knowing all of this sort of stuff is really, really important, because you want your supporters to feel comfortable, confident in their ability to do this work. And of course, you want decision makers to come out to the event, and that's where logistics can be so important to ensuring that you get the best result. So here's just an example of a recent event that CCSN had earlier in October at Queen's Park in Toronto. And there's a picture of Jackie with and some of her colleagues at the actual event. So you can see there that the CCSN banner is in the background, so it makes for sort of good profile and name recognition of the organization. And of course, that brings up another point. You're going to want to take a lot of pictures, tons of pictures of who you met with and who was there. And you're going to want to sort of document the day, because of course, ideally, you're going to put this material up on your organization's website. You're going to use social media. A lot of times what organizations do now is, whether the event is an hour long or it's an entire day, of course, they'll have people live tweeting, posting on Facebook. So social media plays a critical role in ensuring that those people who can't be there, as well as just everybody else who you're connected to, knows how the event is going in real time. So let me shift now to these things called advocacy packages, the next tool I want to talk to you about. The concept is relatively straightforward. As an organization, it's really important that you be able to provide your supporters, individuals, with materials so that they can take action on their own, not necessarily with your guidance kind of thing. And so we use these things called advocacy packages that typically empower an individual to do two primary things. Number one is to write a letter to their provincial member of parliament or federal member of parliament requesting a meeting and going and have a meeting with that person. And two, to write directly to a minister of health, assuming it's a health issue, to a minister of health in their province, if it's provincial, about a particular issue. Those are the two actual tactics that are contemplated in the context of most advocacy packages that we use. And there's 7 distinct documents that are contained in this advocacy package, which I'll go through with you in some detail. In terms of timing, this tool should be used early on, maybe even first in an advocacy campaign, and then consistently throughout your campaign. Now, just take note, you may have to modify your advocacy packages, the content of your advocacy package as your campaign unfolds, but this is a tool that should be used, again, pretty much constantly. Some of the materials are meant to be used as written, while others are templates meant to be altered somewhat, and I'll talk about the distinction in a moment as I walk you through each of these items one at a time, concluding with an overview of how and when you would actually go about using such a package. So the first page is an introduction to advocates. This document is like your cover letter, setting the stage for the reader of this advocacy package. It really needs to grab the reader or the supporter, outlining the urgency of the issue and compelling them to take action by using the advocacy package, while at the same time assuring them that it's easy to do and won't take a lot of time. In the part where you outline the contents of the advocacy package, make sure to provide a link so that they can find their elected representative. And in the contacts section, make sure to have the names, telephone numbers, and emails of at least 2 people. And by the way, there will be a slide coming up in a moment which will give you links to 3 actual advocacy packages that are posted on organizations' websites. So you'll be able to see for yourself some tangible examples of these for your own reference. The next document is the letter to your elected representative requesting a meeting or asking a meeting. I've outlined on this slide 3 basic forms that a letter to an elected representative can take. The first one is basically just a blank sheet of paper or a blank screen in which the reader or the supporter is asked to draft their own letter based on some background information provided. Everyone drafts and sends their own unique letter. I do not recommend you use this form, only because it does not ensure consistency in messaging and outreach to elected representatives. The next one is a form letter, where the reader simply inserts their elected representative's contact information, their own contact information, signs it, and everyone gets exactly the same letter. Again, I don't recommend that typically. Sometimes we'll use this one, but I don't usually recommend it. Again, because form letters are not usually the best way to communicate with people. And so the final one, the hybrid letter, is the one that we use, I would say, 90–95% of the time. So most of it is a form letter, except that the reader is also asked to insert a brief paragraph about their circumstances as it relates to the issue. So the messaging is consistent. A large part of the body of the letter is the same, but there is a paragraph that is unique to that person who's writing it and to the member, to the elected representative receiving it, that makes it somewhat personalized. Okay. Letter to your elected representative in terms of an outline of the actual hybrid letter, assuming that this is the one that is going to most typically be used. So first paragraph, who you are. You should always note that you live in the riding or the constituency. You have to tell the person you're writing to that you live where in the area they represent, and why you're writing to this elected representative. The second paragraph is what I just spoke about a moment ago. This is the personalized one. This is the one that is a version of your personal story and a link to the issue. Third paragraph is a combination of the 3 key messages and some key facts about the issue that you're writing to them about. Fourth paragraph is a restatement of your ask. The 5th paragraph, I'll be in touch shortly to arrange a time to meet, and the thank you, basically. So, as I said, in the first paragraph, always mention that you're a constituent. If they wonder, the person who's receiving this letter, is wondering whether or not you live in their riding or whether or not they represent you, that's a problem. Because if they don't represent you, they're not going to care about this letter, and they're certainly not going to meet with you because they're going to meet with people who they represent. Consider providing some context or an outline of what you want people to include in paragraph 2, so maybe some instructions. I usually include those when I design advocacy packages, so some people have an idea of what to write in this brief paragraph outlining their personal story. Even if someone does not insert their own paragraph 2, make sure that the letter still flows. The paragraph 1 can flow into paragraph 3 even if there is no paragraph 2. And in the final paragraph, always be proactive and mention that you will follow up. Don't ever end a letter with, "I look forward to hearing from you," because there's a very good chance you're not going to get your meeting. You always end a letter with, "and I will follow up," or "I will be following up shortly," to ensure that we are able to decide on a date in which to meet, kind of thing. The next piece of an advocacy package is the third piece, is this idea of a meeting script outline. The idea of a meeting script outline for people to use is often crucial. Most people have never visited an elected representative before. Many people haven't. And the more assistance you can provide to them as an organization, the more likely they are to book an appointment, or the more likely they are to say, "Yes, I'm willing to go and do this kind of work." But as I mentioned, because this is so important, it may be worthwhile asking your members what they might need in a meeting script outline in order to make their experience better. So asking people what might be of assistance to them, I think, can go a long way to ensuring engagement from as many people as possible. But as an example, this is the kind of outline you may want to consider. Again, it's just a sample, but I think it's one that works relatively well in most circumstances. So first thing, when somebody sits down in a meeting with their elected representative, they're going to want to introduce themselves and the people that they are with. They're going to want to explain why they're there and what their one ask is, deliver the 3 key messages, tell a personal story in the context of the issue, review some key facts. Those may be key facts about the organization. They could be key facts about the issue, the disease, if, for example, if it's in healthcare. You want to then deliver your one ask again for the second time, then engage in the dialogue to ensure that your elected representative fulfills your one ask, whatever it is that you're asking them to do, and then, of course, conclude by saying thank you and commit to following up shortly. Again, just an example of an outline. Sometimes we'll vary from this outline, but usually this is a pretty good starting point. The next document is something we call a key facts sheet. Your messaging will be subjective. You will frame your message so that whatever it is that you want the decision maker to know about your organization, about your issue, or whatever it is viewed in a way that you want them to view it. So you're going to use subjective language. That's different than a key facts document. A key facts document should be objective. There should be no commentary in this document. It is just a series of facts that deal with, again, your organization, your issue, a particular disease, whatever it may be. So typically no more than 1 page. It can be used by people as background information about the issue and in the meeting with their elected representatives. So a key facts document often serves 2 purposes. They help to educate your supporters who are going out to do this work about that content I mentioned a moment ago, and it's something that can be used in the actual meeting that they attend. People need not deliver every key fact in the meeting, so this document is not meant to be read or anything like that, but it could also serve as a leave behind with the elected representative, so it's something that can be handed to somebody as they leave or even at the beginning of a meeting. And any province-specific information is always good. That's just a bit of a side note here. So if you're advocating at the provincial level, if you can distill down, and let's say you're doing this in New Brunswick, you can distill down as much as possible how these national or international figures affect specifically New Brunswick, you should do that. Because, of course, these are provincially elected representatives. They're going to feel compelled to understand what's going on in their particular province. Same thing at the national level or at the federal level. If you've got international facts and you can distill it down to something specific to Canada or any other country, that will help you connect more effectively with the decision maker. The report back form, this is the next document, is the best mechanism whereby an organization can really gauge the advocacy work that's being done at the grassroots level. It allows you as an organization to identify champions amongst the elected representatives that people met with and fine-tune your advocacy strategy accordingly. So the report back form, again, you'll see it in the samples. It's relatively straightforward. It doesn't take more than, shouldn't take more than about 5 to 7 minutes for somebody to complete at the conclusion of a meeting. But basically, you want to know just some basic information. As it says there, I won't read it to you. But most importantly, you want to know, did they agree to your one ask, what it is that you asked them to do, and what are the next steps to ensuring that that ask gets fulfilled. If your ask is for your elected representative to write a letter to a minister, for example, that's a very typical ask that we use of elected representatives. Make sure that you have a draft ready for that person to use. The rationale being that if your elected representative says, yes, I'll write a letter on your behalf, your having a draft ready will help to expedite the process and also offer that person no excuses for not writing the letter. So, and as I mentioned, the format will be basically the same as a letter to your elected representatives asking to meet. So this is premised all on the notion that you want to make life as easy as possible for the people that you're meeting with. So if your ask is, I need you to write a letter on my behalf to the Minister of Health in whatever province, and the person says, yes, I'm happy to write the letter. By the way, that's their job. They are supposed to do this kind of work for you. It doesn't mean that they agree with your position. It just means that as your elected representative, I will make your voice heard to the Minister of Health because that's my job, then providing them with a draft to make their life easier is always something that you should consider doing. And then finally, this is document number 7, the final document in our advocacy package. For a letter to the minister, make sure that you write to the minister that can affect the change that you require. Again, I recommend a hybrid letter in most cases, and in this case, include your personal story, ask directly for the change sought, and in the first paragraph, identify yourself not as a constituent, because again, you're not writing to an elected representative at this time, you're writing to a minister who is serving the entire province or the entire country. But you want to identify yourself as a resident of the province, for example, if it's a provincial matter. So a lot of people understand that if they have an issue, a provincial issue, they are entitled to go and see their provincial representative, who can then take their issue forward to the provincial capital or to the requisite minister. However, as a resident of a province, you are also entitled concurrently to write directly to the minister that is impacting the issue that you're concerned about. And that's what this step, this final document, is all about, where you as a, for example, resident of Newfoundland, write directly to the minister in Newfoundland seeking the ask that you have. Just a little bit about using these packages before I get on to the next slide, which is a link to the ones that I mentioned or posted. There are 2 keys to the successful use of these advocacy packages. Number 1, disseminating them as widely as possible. You want these advocacy packages to go out to as many people as possible to utilize, to as many supporters as possible to utilize, kind of thing. So you'll notice, for example, in the samples, when you take a look at them, or if you take a look at them, that the first paragraph does not say, I am a patient, or something like that. It talks about being impacted by the disease, or impacted by the issue, or concerned about the issue. So you don't want to narrowly apply the wording of these materials. You want to apply them broadly so that as many people as possible can potentially utilize them. And secondly, you want to draft them, well, that was actually the first one, you would draft them to appeal to as wide an audience as possible. In terms of dissemination, go back to the first point, you want to make sure that you get this out as much as possible to your networks. So post them on your website, push them out through social media, take paper copies to a meeting if at all possible, and then you can direct people back to your website so that they can get electronic copies, because as you can see, these materials are meant to be used electronically. They're not really applicable to paper copies, but taking paper copies to prompt interest can be important as well. But basically, you want to push them out as widely as possible, so that, back to my first point, you can get them in the hands into as many people as possible, so that anybody who's impacted by the issue will feel comfortable using them. And then just the final slide on advocacy packages. These are 3 organizations that have advocacy packages posted on their websites, at least as of a couple of weeks ago when I checked them, and you can utilize those links to go through and see them. Now, none of these are in oncology. I don't have any currently posted in oncology. These are all live for you to use. And I encourage you, I'll be very clear about this, I encourage you to use these packages and to take these samples and use them. I developed them, but I developed them for people to basically copy, to use for lack of a better word. So please do, and modify them accordingly, or if there's another angle that you want to take with them, please do. But feel free to use these and try to maximize the benefit I know that they can provide to organizations. So moving on to the next tool, collective letters. Collective letters are different than the advocacy packages we just talked about a moment ago. They're usually used with groups of healthcare professionals, so for example, physicians who want to make their unified voice heard to a key decision maker. So it can be done with patients and caregivers, but usually it's done with healthcare professionals. It's important that these collective letters, so it represents a series of, it represents a position from a group of like-minded individuals. It's important to have one or two authors. I prefer two authors if at all possible. They then email the letter to their colleagues asking them to sign on by providing theirs. It says name, credentials, affiliation, and where they work. So it's one of the easiest advocacy actions you can ask one to take, particularly a healthcare professional who's busy. When used by healthcare professionals, they are often somewhat clinical in nature. The content is somewhat clinical in nature. We often use them to coincide with a face-to-face meeting with the decision maker the collective letter is addressed to. So whoever's going to be receiving the collective letter, embedded in the collective letter will be a request, a specific request to meet to talk about the content in the collective letter in more detail. The key to collective letters is to get as many people to sign on as possible, ideally representing a wide range of interests and geography, for example. Their use needs to align with your work as a patient group and are typically utilized midway through a campaign. So I haven't included a whole workup around collective letters. There's a lot more around how they're designed, how they're structured, how they're sent out to maximize the number of people that sign on to them, and then how they're sent to a single source target, so one person within government and followed up with and all that sort of stuff. But this gives you a basic outline. Anybody on the call who wants more information about collective letters, you can let me know. I'm happy to provide you with more if it's something of interest to you. Petitions, this is the next tool we're going to talk about. Usually used well into a campaign and sometimes in conjunction with advocacy packages. You would never do a petition as the very first thing you want your supporters to do, or at least not that I can ever think of, in the context of a broader campaign or a real sort of campaign to bring about change, not just a campaign to quickly make some noise. I like to use petitions further down in the process. There are essentially two kinds of petitions, online and paper. Online petitions can be very effective at gathering a lot of names very quickly, as all of you appreciate. You can often set them up for free, although just be aware that some sites will charge you a fee once you get past a certain number of names. And then the names can then be emailed to a decision maker, printed off to be delivered in person, or you can just refer to them, for example, and have them posted on a website. But paper petitions, I think, are often a better way to go. And by the way, you can do both electronic and paper petitions, but paper petitions, I think in particular, have a lot of real hidden power to them. When I first started doing this work, I was not a fan of paper petitions, but I've actually become quite a large proponent of them for some of the reasons that I'll go through with you today. Paper petitions are more typically used because they can be introduced into a provincial legislature. Each legislature has its own format that must be followed or the petitions will not be accepted. And there's a link there for you that gives you an idea of how each of the provincial legislatures structures and views petitions. And as it says there, every sitting day has an agenda item called petitions. So at the federal level and all the provinces, if you watch an entire sitting day, then you will see the sitting day of a legislature is divided into certain pieces, into certain chunks, and one of those pieces is called petitions. It's not usually very long, it's about 5 minutes, but it allows the members of that legislature to introduce petitions, paper petitions, not electronic petitions, with one exception. And so you can, and so this is an opportunity for you to get your petitions read into a sitting day. And you can then go online and print a copy of your petition being read because there's a record of it. Hansard is the official recording service of the legislatures and the federal government in Canada, and that recording service is something that will have on the record the introduction of your petition. Petitions are the absolute easiest advocacy action you can ask anyone to do, because it takes about 10 seconds for somebody to do it. But it needs to be timed around a legislature sitting. So if you're going to do paper petitions, you can't have them introduced if the legislature that you're targeting isn't sitting. It has to be sitting. Now, you can go out and gather names while the legislature is not sitting, and then send them in to ensure that they'll be introduced at that time. Once introduced, the minister responsible for the issue that the petition addresses is required to respond to the member who introduced the petition, and that it provides you with further tangible proof of engagement. And you're going to want to ask the person who introduces the petition on your behalf, you're going to want to ask them to be copied on that response by the minister. But always remember, this is a very important point on petitions. I can't emphasize this enough. Members are not required to introduce petitions. You could go see your provincial member of parliament, have a whole stack of petitions with 500 names signed, and that person is not compelled to introduce them into the legislature. I'm not saying they're not going to introduce them. I'm just telling you they're not required to introduce them. And so one of the things that we always suggest people do is, as you're handing the petitions over to the decision maker, take a picture. Take a picture of you handing the petitions to your elected representative, and then take that picture and post it somewhere, or send it out on Twitter or whatever, so that the whole world knows I just gave my MLA or MPP 500 names signed on a petition that I've asked her to introduce into the provincial legislature. She'll introduce them. If you tell the whole world she's going to introduce them, she'll introduce them. There will be no question that she'll do what you want to do, because you've made it public that you've made this request, kind of thing. So that's just a little thing that we always suggest that people do. And finally, this is our last advocacy tool before we wrap up. Just two more slides, and they are postcards. Postcards are the second easiest thing you can ask someone to do in support of your issues. Petition being the easiest, postcard being the second easiest. They're typically used well into a campaign to bring significant pressure to bear on what we call a single target. So, for example, the Minister of Health or something like that. And here's an example of a postcard that we prepared some years ago for the Schizophrenia Society of Canada. On the one side, you would have your logo, and your issue should be highlighted. So this is very, very simple, very, very clear. And then on the other side, a single target should be identified. So in this particular case, it was the Minister of Health. You want to create set text incorporating your key messages. So if you read that paragraph on the left, starting as a person affected by mental illness, and those 7 lines, those are a combination of 3 key messages that we tried to get across in the context of this postcard, because you don't have a lot of space, obviously. You want to leave space for people to identify themselves, so obviously your name and your address. Have the address of the target, which is on the right-hand side, as you can see there. Note that they can be pre-stamped and mailed, or collected and dropped off in person as part of a meeting with a decision maker. That's a strategic decision that you would make as an organization. More and more, I will tell you that organizations are not mailing in postcards. They are collecting them back, and they are taking them in, 200, 500, 5,000 postcards, whatever it may be, and they are walking them in to the minister who they are directed at. That's who should receive them. And they're saying, we have the following, 750 postcards, and here they are. And then, of course, you take a picture of it, and you're back on social media and all of that kind of stuff. And while a lot of postcards to one individual will certainly get their attention, it's important to press on with your other advocacy tools, like face-to-face meetings, which, again, we talked about a week ago, as it's a combination of their use. It's a combination of all of these different tools that we talked about today, as well as face-to-face meetings, that will ultimately lead you to getting what it is that you need. So that's it for a review of advocacy tools. My contact information is there for your reference. And in a moment, I'll just go on to the last slide, which is the contact information for CCSN. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ryan. Really appreciate you coming on today. As of right now, I'm not seeing any questions come through, so if anybody on the line does have a question right now, please type it in the questions box. Let us know if you have anything that you want clarified, or anything that you think Ryan might be able to help you with while we've got him. We do still have another 15 minutes left, so if anybody does have any questions, please just let us know in the questions box. If you don't see it on your screen, there is a little orange arrow button on your control panel, and if you click on that, it should open the control panel up if it isn't already, and the questions box should be in there. Now, I'll just go over what we've got coming up here at CCSN in terms of webinars. We actually do have another webinar next week. It is on Tuesday, November 29th, so note that the date is different. It's not on Monday, it's next Tuesday. We'll be at the same time from 1 to 2 p.m. and we'll actually be talking about precision medicine in oncology, and we're going to have two expert panelists, two doctors, one from Ottawa and one from out in BC. So we'll get a couple of different perspectives on precision medicine and how that is coming along in the oncology field right now. So you can stay tuned to our e-letter. If you're not already signed up for it, you can do that on the front page of our website, and we'll also be posting information about that webinar on our website and social media and everything. So you'll hear lots about that in the next couple of days. So still not seeing any questions from anyone yet here, Ryan, so what I'll let everybody know is that if you do, oh, here we go, Janet just asked something. She says, does this advocacy approach work for every type of organization? For instance, if I were to be interested in lobbying organizations that govern healthcare professionals for change?
So I think the tools might have to be adapted accordingly. Janet, the basic foundation of advocacy is the same, irrespective of what the issue is, and irrespective of who your target is. So whether it's government, or, as I say, whether you're advocating to your child's teacher, your spouse's physician, the basic approach to advocacy, 3 key messages, your tools, your one ask, are exactly the same. Now, which tools you use, how those tools are utilized, and that sort of thing will absolutely depend on who it is that you are targeting. So these tools that I've highlighted today, I think, work primarily, for example, for government. Petitions, for example, are focused very much on governments, although you can also use petitions in other non-government circumstances. I think the advocacy days or the events and stuff may or may not lend themselves to other organizations, but again, it's mostly for governments. I think the advocacy packages are one that could be modified depending on who it is that you are advocating to, and could be modified accordingly so that they could target somebody in a particular way, but of course it wouldn't have anything to do with your elected representatives. And then I think postcards are another one that could be utilized outside of government with the requisite changes. I think, any decision maker in any circumstance who suddenly is asked to meet and is presented with, 700 postcards on her desk is probably going to sit up and pay attention, or at least she certainly should, irrespective of whether she works in government or not. So, yeah, I'd say some of them certainly lend themselves to it, and of course, face-to-face meetings, which again we didn't talk about today. Absolutely, I mean that's one that should be utilized in virtually every single advocacy campaign to some degree. I can't think of any exceptions, even if it's not government that you're targeting.
Okay, and it looks like, oh, Janet says thanks, so obviously you answered her question well. But But I'm not seeing anything else at this time, so maybe what I'll do, just in the interest of not keeping everybody for any longer than really needs to be, if anybody does have any more questions for Ryan, you can email him or us or either one of us, and we'll get the question answered. So just so everybody knows, this webinar is going to be available online beginning tomorrow. You'll all be sent links to the YouTube video and as well the slides on SlideShare. And other than that, we just want to thank Ryan for joining us again today, and we'll see you all next week.
Thank you.